Eagles. Today I'm going to read one of our favorites, Fly High, Fly Low by Don Freeman. Do you recognize that city? The beautiful city of San Francisco, a city famous for its fogs and flowers, cable cars and towers. There once stood an electric light sign on top of a tall building, and inside the letter B of this sign there lived a pigeon. Can you find the letter B? Right over here. B for Bay Hotel. Before choosing to make his home here, this proud gray pigeon had tried living in many other letters in the alphabet. Just why he liked the lower loop of the letter B, no one yet knew. During the day, the wide side walls kept the wind away, and at night, the bright lights kept him warm and cozy. I think that's a good reason to live there. Look at that view. The pigeons who roosted along the ledges of the building across the street thought he was a pretty persnickety pigeon to live where he did. He's too choosy, they would coo. The only one who never made fun of him was a white-feathered dove. She felt sure he must have a good reason for wanting to live in that letter. You see the dove? Every morning, as soon as the sun came up, these two met in mid-air, and together they swerved and swooped down into Union Square Park, where they pecked up their breakfast. Mr. Hiley was certain to be there, throwing out crumbs from his large paper sack. He would always greet them by saying, "Good morning, Sid and Midge. How are my two early birds?" All the birds in the city regarded Mr. Hiley as their best friend, and he had nicknames for many of them. Sometimes he brought them hard breadcrumbs, and sometimes, as an extra special treat, day-old cake crumbs from a nearby bakery. After every crumb was pecked up, the pigeons always circled around Mr. Hiley's head, flapping their wings as they flew, which was their way of saying, "Thank you." By noontime, Sid and Midge could be seen sailing high in the sky, flying into one cloud and out the other. Side by side, they glided over the bay. Do you recognize where they are? It's Fisherman's Wharf. Until they could look down and see the Golden Gate Bridge. Sid would swoop and fly through the open arches just to show Midge what a good looper he was. Does that look like fun? To fly all through the tops of the Golden Gate Bridge? Then, as the setting sun began painting the sky with a rosy glow, two tuckered-out birds would be slowly winging their way back to the park just in time for supper. One evening, after an especially gay lark in the sky, Sid invited Midge to stay and share his letter B with him. Well, that was kind and caring, wasn't it? Across the way, pigeons were soon bobbing their heads up and down, cooing, "Ever heard of birds building a nest and a sign? It'll never do, it'll never do." But Sid and Midge went right on building their nest as best they could. They used patches of cloth and strands of string and bits of straw, and gradually there grew a strong nest with a perfect view. Then one misty morning, a few weeks later, just as everything was going along smoothly, Something happened which was very upsetting. It occurred right after Sid had flown down to the park to peck up his breakfast. As usual, he had left Midge taking her turn sitting on the nest, where there were now 2 eggs to keep warm. Suddenly, like a bolt out of the blue, Midge felt their perch give a terrible lurch. The buildings across the way seemed to sway back and forth. "It's an earthquake!" screeched Midge. But no, it was even worse than an earthquake. Their sign was being taken down. One by one, the letters were being lowered into a waiting truck below. Midge followed, flapping her wings wildly at the movers, trying to get them to know that they must not take her nest. But the men paid no attention to her until the tallest man stopped and shouted, "Hold everything! Look here what I found! 2 eggs in a nest! No wonder that pigeon has been making such a fuss." "Well, what do you know?" exclaimed another man as he took a peek inside. "We're sure to have to take good care of this letter. Come to think of it, I know of a bakery shop that could use a big letter B. Anyway, we won't be throwing this one away. Come on, men, let's get going." Phew! Do you think Midge knows where they're going to take the bee? How do you think she feels right now? Down the hill they went and far out of sight, with Midge clinging on with all her might. You can imagine how Sid felt when he landed back on the cold and empty scaffold later that morning. He stood there dazed and bewildered, wondering where his sign had gone. Where was his Midge? Where, oh where, was their nest with those 2 precious eggs? This is the scaffold where the sign used to hang. It's completely empty now. Doesn't look quite the same, does it? He looked around on all sides, but not a trace of his sign did he see. Suddenly off he flew. First to the waterfront. Possibly the sign was being loaded onto a boat. Sid was sure that wherever that particular letter B was, there too Midge would be. He looked high and he looked low, but not a sign of his letter did he spy. Next he flew to the uppermost part of the Golden Gate Bridge. He thought perhaps Midge might have passed by that way, but no, not a feather did he find. While he stood, wondering where to search next, an enormous fog bank came rolling in from the ocean. Like a rampaging flock of sheep, the fog came surging straight toward him. When Sid saw this, he puffed out his chest and he stretched out his wings wide, and he cried, "Who's afraid of a little breeze? I'll flap my wings and blow the wind away." Oh, but the fog rolled silently on, and before Sid knew what had happened, he was completely surrounded by a dense, damp grayness. And the faster he flew, the thicker the fog grew, until he could barely see beyond his beak. Down, down he dived, hoping to land on solid ground. All at once he found himself standing on top of a traffic signal light in the busiest part of town. Once inside the green "Go" signal, Sid began fluffing up his wings, trying to dry them off before going on with his search for Midge. What Sid didn't know was that his fluffed up wings hid the word "Go," and no one in the street dared to budge. Soon there was a roar of automobile horns. People certainly got awfully upset over a little fog, said Sid as he stuck out his head. But just then along came a policeman, and when he blew his whistle, beep, beep, Sid flew out like a streak of lightning. At last the traffic could move on. By now the fog had changed into rain. Everybody started hopping aboard the cable cars, which is what people do in San Francisco, wherever the hills are too steep or the weather too wet. And that's exactly what Sid did. Under the big bell on top of the cable car, he found the perfect umbrella. If only the conductor hadn't shouted, "Hold on tight! Sharp corner ahead!" And then clanged the bell. The clapper of the bell hit Sid so hard he fell overboard. In the street gutter below, all bruised and weary, he hobbled along, muttering to himself, "People, it's all people's fault." Oh, poor Sid. Was he ever going to find Midge? But then he began to think of the kind man in the park. Would Mr. Hi-Lee be there on such a terrible day as this? Sid tried to spread his wings and fly. Oh, but he was too weak. He would have to walk all the way to Union Square. Fortunately, the park was only a couple of blocks away. And just as Sid hopped up onto the curb, he felt a gentle hand reach down and pick him up. I wonder whose hand that is. The next thing Sid knew, he was inside Mr. Hi-Lee's warm overcoat pocket, where much to his surprise he found several sunflower seeds. Right away he began to feel better. He could hardly wait to get on with his search for Midge. When he peeped out, he saw that the rain had stopped and warm rays from the sun were beginning to shine down. Mr. Hi-Lee talked to his friend inside of his pocket as he walked along. "Around the corner from here I know of a bakery where we can get something more for you to eat," he said. Does anyone remember where the workers are going to bring the letter B? Anyone? As they neared the shop, Mr. Hi-Lee noticed some men putting a large letter in the sign above the doorway. Well, look at that, a new letter B. Out popped Sid's head further. What was that he heard? It sounded exactly like a certain bird he knew cooing. Could it be? Is that the letter B? Who does he hear cooing? Yes, indeed, it was his very own Midge. She had stayed with their nest through thick and thin. Up flew Sid like an arrow shot from a bow, and oh, what a meeting! Such billing and cooing as you've never heard. And no wonder, for their 2 eggs were just about to hatch. Out came 2 tiny beaks breaking through the shells, and out of the bakery shop came the baker and his customers. They all wanted to know what the excitement was about. Sid knew that his first duty was to find some food for Midge, so down he flew, and there was Mr. Hi-Lee already holding out his hand full of cake crumbs. After taking the crumbs to Midge, Sid hurried right back down, and this time he circled around and around Mr. Hi-Lee's head, flapping his wings happily. And we know what he meant by that. What did he mean? Was he saying thank you? Some time later, when their old neighbors came flying by, they saw Sid and Midge peacefully perched in the lower loop of the letter B, and the 2 little ones in the upper loop. Oh, those lucky birds, they cooed as they flew away. Sid certainly did know what he was doing when he chose that letter B. He sure did, didn't he? I hope you enjoyed that. Bye-bye.